Let's talk Lucknow again. I am Mehru Jaffer. पिछले कई एपिसोड में हम आपको लखनऊ लाए हैं, लेकिन 19वीं शताब्दी में लेकर गए। हमने बात की उस दौर की जब शायर नाशिक जैसे, मुशफ़ी जैसे, इंशा, रंगीन और आतिश इस शहर में रहते थे। ख़ास बात यह है कि लखनऊ की ज़बान इस वक्त फ़ारसी से तो नाता तोड़ ही रही थी, लेकिन दिल्ली की बोली से भी अपने आप को अलग करने में मसरूफ़ थी। The Urdu language now had arrived to usher in a golden age of poetry writing during the lifetime of Mushafi, Nashik and Atish. It was impossible to stop the citizens of Lucknow from speaking the way they wanted to and not the way they were told to, and who had insisted that their language was an authority in its own right. They let the people in Delhi say Andhyari, referring to the same dark night as Andheri Raat. Without worrying about what Delhi would say, the cream in the milk continued to be called Balai in Lucknow instead of Malai. Smoking tobacco remained Tambaku, while tobacco that went inside betel leaves was Tambaku. There was no need anymore to say smoking tobacco is Tambaku and tobacco in betel leaves is Zarda, in imitation of Delhi. As we know, most of the mentors of poets in Lucknow were from Delhi. With master teachers like Nashik, the poetic practices and inspiration was to be found now in Lucknow itself. Nashik's use of words and idioms were perfect. He was a guru most revered in Lucknow, and everyone thought it an honor to learn from Nashik. Urdu literary life in Awadh had come into its own. It had been lit up by poets and scholars who came from Delhi following attacks on the city by Persian, Afghan, Maratha and Jat armies. Lucknow had welcomed the immigrants, and now that Awadh was independent of Delhi, it continued to offer generous patronage to poets, writers and scholars of Urdu and the Persian language. Nashik and Atish were two favorite students of Mushafi, and they avoided the unnecessary use of Arabic and Persian vocabulary in their writing. The Persian style description of the physical beauty of the beloved was now avoided. Younger poets were encouraged to look for more creative themes or mawzu and to find inspiration in local similes and metaphors instead of monotonous references to never seen in Awadh doves, nightingales, wine and taverns found in decadent Persian poetry. Nashik uses the cobra now to compare the beloved's stresses here. He writes, the poet says that it is not possible for him to suddenly give up thinking of her tresses, as he has nursed the dark cobra for so long. किस तरह छोड़ूं यकायक तेरी जुल्फों का ख्याल, किस तरह छोड़ूं यकायक तेरी जुल्फों का ख्याल, एक मुद्दत से ये काले नाग हैं पाले हुए. It was at a mushaira that Atish had first heard Nashik recite his poetry. And when Atish heard Nashik recite his poetry, he was consumed by envy. Atish means fire, and the poet with the very sweet face had a temper worse than fireworks. In a fit of jealousy for Nashik, Atish had recited verses with such desperation that blood began to drip from his chest. Loathing between the two poets had often escalated to such an extent that Nashik and Atish decided not to attend the same mushaira together. They had constantly teased each other in verse. Atish had taunted Nashik, wondering if he was even aware of what people said about him behind his back. In certain recitations, the quick tempered Atish had mocked Nasik's wealth and his looks, while the audience had cheered. Nashik had mostly sat in stoic silence. Once a great admirer of Nashik had wanted to honor him at a mushaira. When the quick tempered Atish heard this, he was furious. Anger made him restless. He bit his fingernails and fidgeted with his long hair. He flung his long beard, he flung his long braid this side and that side, making the cap parked on his head at an angle nearly fall. He composed a poem. He took the poem and a sword that he had pulled out of the sheath worn around his waist to the mushaira. The visitors were surprised to see the very tall, thin, and sweet-faced Atish hurry up towards the assembly of poets, waving a naked sword in his hand. Atish found a place to sit exactly opposite Nashik, and he placed the sword beside him. He listened to Nashik recite his poem and straightened his shoulders. Throughout the recitation, Atish had picked up the sword and dropped it back, repeating the gesture over and over again. That evening, Atish had made a lot of people very nervous. His host was anxious. What if Atish used the sword to make a hole in his stomach? He had worried. But once he was told why Atish was so excited and so angry, the host had immediately ordered another robe of honor and bestowed it on Atish. This way, both Atish and Nashik were felicitated at the same mushaira. Once the rituals of the evening were over, the host was relieved to see the poets leave in peace. Atish was born in a family of mystics in Faizabad in 1777. As a young man, Atish had joined the police force, and that brief experience as a policeman had added swagger to his gait. He was a fine swordsman and seldom forgot to wear his sword around the waist. His father died when he was very young. That incident had interrupted his formal education, leaving none to help him to deal with the wild side of his temperament. Although not a Sufi, Atish had lived his life like a fakir. In the end, Nashik and Atish were actually very good friends. It was rogues around them who had provoked the two to make a spectacle of their rivalry in public for their own entertainment. Their personalities were polar opposite, and perhaps that is why they found each other so attractive. In poetry, Nashik was particular about form and about diction, while the concern of Atish was content and feelings. Atish had concentrated on expressing everyday experiences of the human heart in carefully chosen lyrical but everyday vocabulary. Here, the poet is unable to entertain any other idea except a vision of the beloved, while the desire to see her has made him blind. Kuch, writes Atish, kuch nazar aata nahi uske tasavvur ke siva. Kuch nazar aata nahi uske tasavvur ke siva. हजरते दीदार ने आँखों को अंधा कर दिया. The fire found in his poetry had illuminated the private world of each of his listeners. Says Atish that except for sorrow, there is nothing more to gain in this wasteland of life. Be grateful, he said, for every moment of peace experienced. सिवाय रंज कुछ हासिल नहीं है इस खराबे में. सिवाय रंज कुछ हासिल नहीं है इस खराबे में. गनीमत जान जो आराम तूने कोई दम पाया. Atish was 5 years younger to Nashik. The two poets had bonded well despite the many verbal wars between them. Together, Nashik and Atish are the most representative of the Lucknow style of ghazal writing. Atish was grief-stricken when Nashik died almost a decade before him, and he stopped to write poetry from that day. Atish was unable to compose verses after the death of Nashik, because when the person I enjoy reciting to is no more, then it is not poetry that I will compose, but gibberish, Atish said, throwing down his pen forever. अगले एपिसोड तक के लिए खुदा हाफ़िज़.